Okay, excellent. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am joined today by George Webb, Aaron, and Andy from the Neighborhoods News Studio, the Swing State Studios over there in Michigan. How are you guys doing? I already talked to George today. I want to know how Andy and Aaron are doing.
Doing great.
I'm doing good. Just keeping the battle going up here in Swing State Studios, trying to keep our chins up and keep fighting for our liberty and our pursuit of happiness. So hope you guys are enjoying the beaches down there in South Carolina. I'm a little jealous myself.
Doing super duper excellent. I want to be sure, are we doing an OTPOR research roundup here for about an hour tonight?
Sure, whatever you want, Aaron.
I was thinking for our audience's sake and the sake of all the research you've been doing. And I wore
Take it away, Aaron. Start us off.
I wore this hat, George. I'm not necessarily a Cleveland fan, but you were born in Cleveland. And we may have to end the stream if you don't know the answer to this, but what is the name of the fan base of the Cleveland Browns? The group there that would sit there the
dog pound.
The dog pound. The dog pound. Right?
Come on.
I knew you were gonna know that one. I knew you were gonna
What? Jesus. So I
feel like I'm in the dog pound.
Okay.
Peter Duke said you were like a dog on a bone with certain things. And as the junior scout or whatever you said with the CIA agent Brad the other day, was how are we supposed to do the job and do the research and do it? And it's like you and what you've taught us here with OTPOR, I've felt like a dog on the OTPOR bone the last 24 to 48 hours. So, I could use you here to have a leash on me, right? Because it's just go get him, boy. Go get him, boy. It's I got him,
Well, I want to update people on what we did today. George and I spoke with Ann Vandersteel on her show, and we also did a couple videos at the beach as well. So pretty productive day. We got started on George's new book, and we got the intro done, and we're going to be back at it tomorrow as well. So a little chillier. What's that, Aaron?
Our sound's messing up here. Is it just us?
Who is that?
Maybe it's me because I have the volume on too loud.
Okay. I think that's it. Oh, there it is again.
I'll turn it down.
It could be us too. We're using the studio device.
Okay. I think we're good. So, cooler day today. It was in the 50s, but coldest day of the week. So we got some 60s and 70s later on, and we'll just be continuing to do interviews and work on George's book. We got a lawyer on Thursday, which is tomorrow, and yeah. So we had a great interview with Brad Johnson. Was it yesterday or 2 days ago? But Aaron, do you want to start off what you've been researching recently?
Well, I've just been watching you guys, just getting back to being a super fan and loving what you guys are doing and watching the videos over and over and over, trying to let it sink in, and let it pour over me so that I can absorb all the information. And, there's certain areas of the research that it's you come to understand it and then you figure everybody's going to catch up. And the best thing to do is go race ahead to get to the next step so that everybody, when they're ready, they can get there. And I wonder, George often calls it throwing spaghetti against the wall. And I don't want to throw spaghetti against the wall, but I think with all that you guys have done and all that we know, it is time to get it all out here for all of our researchers in terms of OTPOR and what this could be. And I'm just wondering, it can't be this easy, is it? It might be this easy, huh?
Well,
Go ahead, George.
Let me lay a little foundation here. Aaron is referring to a group in Belgrade, Serbia, the former Yugoslav Republic, which is OTPOR, which means the resistance. That means the resistance in Serbian. And this group was a NATO group known for doing psychological operations for color revolutions, meaning, hey, the CIA is going to fund a opposition group in a country. We're going to fly in mujahideen from places in Central Asia. We're going to bolster the ranks of the mujahideen. We're going to give them weapons. We're going to show them how to use C4. We're going to train them how to build bombs. We're going to use biological weapons. We're going to use everything we can to topple governments and then take over the governments. In the meantime, George Soros is going to take positions in currency of those countries and make huge amounts of money triaging and arbitraging those currencies. And we're going to just do that in a domino, like a dominion-like fashion, from country to country to country as we carve up these former Yugoslav republics like Kosovo and Serbia. Then we're going to cash in by bringing in the UN and establishing green zones and have 20 years where we have UN operations, which is Army of Occupation, where we can traffic girls, traffic boys, traffic drugs, traffic weapons, and we'll go from that Yugoslav republic to trafficking weapons in Africa, and so on and so forth. So we'll just keep moving it along. We'll keep moving the rat lines along. And that's Odpor. Now that wouldn't have come into our story right now. It would have just sat there as a separate story in sort of mothballs until this voting system that's in the news now called Dominion voting is so prevalent now in our election fraud investigations and lawsuits by Trump. And specifically, we have 2,994 counties in America that had flawless elections, for the most part. Small aberration. But we had 5 or maybe 6 counties in America with incredible statistic aberrations, some 5 and 6 standard deviations away from statistical norms that occurred in just 4 or 5 counties. And they are the typical counties that have election aberrations and wacky frauds and overvoting to 120% of the population, the total population of the counties, year after biennium after biennium. And we'll name those counties. One of is Wayne County in Michigan, which gave us problem voting after polls closed. Another one was Fulton County in Atlanta, where we had problems after polls closed. Another one was Clark County in Nevada after polls closed. Another one was Maricopa County in Arizona after polls closed. So what was the shocker? Okay, these 2 stories were totally not connected in any way until they did the research on Dominion voting, and Dominion voting was in all these same counties. Now, Dominion voting is in 28 states. It's not just in these 5 trouble counties, but it turned out Dominion voting systems mapped almost one for one where the Trump lawsuits were. Okay, then the Belgrade connection came in, where it turned out that the programmers, the software programmers for this Dominion voting system, which you would have thought after the Russians interfered in our elections in 2016, you would have thought the last possibility that you could have entered into your mind would be that Eastern European programmers would be programming the Dominion systems for this 2020 election, this critical election, this watershed election. But in actual fact, that's exactly what happened. This group in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, these 50 programmers were in a foreign country, and they were the key programmers that programmed this place where we had all this trouble. And it turns out, early indications, that they're in the same exact building. They're in the same building as Otpor in Belgrade, Serbia.
So
now we
the
don't
building,
we don't have them on the same network. We don't have them on the same router. But just the fact you're in the same building as Otpor that did all these color revolutions gives you pause. Gives you pause.
the fact that they're in Serbia and that Serbia is, at this point, from what I can ascertain, Otpor nation and is basically a green zone for 20 years. And that at this point, 20 years on, this is what you get when you can have a whole little nation like Serbia. Because the same building would be a great smoking gun. Just the fact that it's Serbia has got me like, okay, what do we have here, right? And we'll go. I could use 25 hours with you, right? But like Gene Sharp, Gene Sharp.
I've heard the name.
So this is a Gene Sharp operation. Otpor and
Gene Smith, you mean the Congress?
No, there's the Congressman Chris Smith.
Oh, Chris Smith, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping we were going to be able to whiteboard this session here. I guess
That's okay. Chris Smith was the congressman from New Jersey.
He's a New Jersey congressman, and from what I can ascertain, he's the first guy to really go to the mat for these people. This was in 2001, right, where he went and said, Otpor is this group that needs our support. They're overthrowing Milosevic, blah, 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 right? But as ridiculous as Otpor is, and as outrageously upset I am with Otpor and the fact that it does appear as if we are victims of an Otpor revolutionary operation, just as dozens of countries have been in the last 20 years. I don't even want to blame them. I do. We know that we have to blame them. And it's going to be pretty clear that we are victims of Otpor the same way that so many others have been victims of Otpor. And it is going to be the foreign interference and all that other stuff. It's always going to come back, because my Osprey grandfathers have taught me well, George and John, right? It's always going to come back to these CIA, DARPA, bleepity bleeps. And another one of them is Gene Sharp, right? And he's there. He is the National Endowment for Democracy, Freedom House, Albert Einstein Institute, Harvard groups with Kissinger in the 60s. And he's a Saul Alinskyite, our audience certainly is going to know Saul Alinsky. And this is going to be one of the big Saul Alinskyites. And
who is Saul Alinsky, Aaron?
Saul Alinsky, he's out of Chicago, right? I mean, they're most famously out of Chicago. He's kind of one of those 1960s, 1950s, even maybe precursor to the 60s, community organizers, right? Revolutionary / community organizers, right? How to get everybody to screw everything and flip the script and, fundamental change. Obama's fundamental change would have come from Saul Alinsky. And Gene Sharp was cut from this cloth. Gene Sharp died in 2018. I got so many hits on Gene Sharp and Henry Kissinger on compound searches that it's just like, where do you even start, right? And it is still going to be Kissinger, and it is still going to be Stern Gang, and the Leahy thing, or whatever the Leahy fist is, you're not going to convince me that the Otpor fist and the BLM fist and all these other fists aren't the Leahy fist. And Leahy is Stern Gang, right? So there's going to be that. And I don't know that we're going to get there. And, we don't have enough to go there. Not that it's necessary. We need to stick to this century. But it's all going to be there. But it's like, let me start with this. Is election interference violence or nonviolence? It's nonviolence, right? And we have all been trained to have this mantra of violence bad, nonviolence good. You must be nonviolent. You must be nonviolent. You must be nonviolent, right? And so they are. And meddling with an election is nonviolent, right? I mean, kind of. And the tactics of Gene Sharp, who was funded by DARPA and the CIA and that whole late 1960s psychoanalysis, like, hey, let's use psycho this and that to control peoples and nations rather than bombs and bullets. He's cut from that cloth, you know, so he does that job for Kissinger and the boys. And that's what Otpor is. You know, they're going to carry that flag. They're going to carry the non-violence flag. And it's like, I wish I had Nelson Mandela's book here, right? Because I'm like weeping for him. They're like, man, they ruined nonviolence too, didn't they? Nonviolence used to be a beautiful thing when we had Gandhi and Nelson Mandela and all the others. And they, you know, the CIA, thanks to the CIA and DARPA, we can't even have nonviolence anymore, can we? Because they've turned nonviolence into the most outrageously confrontational declaration of war that we've ever seen. And they can call it nonviolent. And I feel almost like Kafka-esque in like, how would I defend my argument, right? Oh, well, are you advocating violence? No, I'm not advocating violence. I've never touched a gun and I've never held a gun. But if I'm going to have to go against these nonviolent people who find it righteous and good to meddle in elections as their way of exercising nonviolence because the CIA and DARPA taught them to, then yeah, like as Connie Bevan says here, rules for radicals, read it, right? But that's what we're dealing with, man. It's like, geez, the DARPA did it again. You know, DARPA did it again. And thank you, McDuff, John, and George, and all your work. Because it's like, you know, us here in the Osprey Dog Pound, you give us bones, and we're just like, oh, we found DARPA. It ain't fine. It ain't hard to find DARPA on these people. So yeah, we're victims of DARPA again. Here we are.
Well, Connie made mention, Connie Bevan, our great researcher in Utah, made mention of Rules for Radicals, which is the book that Saul Alinsky wrote, which is basically a handbook of saying, blaming your enemies or blaming your opponents for all the nasty stuff that you do. So any nasty stuff or dirty tricks that you do, you compound it by then creating press events or creating journalists that will write fake articles that will then blame the opposition for exactly what you did. So two examples of Saul Alinsky would be one, Warren Flood bringing in Eastern European operatives to quote unquote hack the DNC, and the thing they hack, of all the things they could get at the DNC, not the money laundering of Libya and Syria money, no, they go for this Trump dirt file, and they publish the Trump dirt file, right? And then, so that's a way of getting the Trump dirt file out in the public, and then they blame Trump and his East Russian hackers for getting the Trump dirt file out and publishing that, right? So that would be an example of Saul Alinsky. Just for the folks who don't have that background. And I think what Aaron is talking about is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is the Defense Department's DARPA, which tends to invest in these wacky programs that you wouldn't ever think could possibly be funded by a government. Coronavirus to do lockdowns of populations, to subdue populations. Coming up with these wacky election voting systems to switch and flip elections at the last minute. These are things that you would never think a government would be involved in investing in. But in actual fact, that is what they're investing in. And if you do look at DARPA and their funding of the government of Pakistan for developing the coronavirus weapons program, you find that there is these trails, these footprints. And you've, like Aaron has mentioned here, if you look at these political operations, you'll see these footprints where they're coming up with, hey, how do we flip these elections? How do we hack these elections? And actually investing a lot of money through a lot of different universities, not just one or two, but like 20 universities at a time to flip these elections. And the universities are not just in the United States, they're all over the world. So that's what we're talking about, is a systematic, government-sponsored, high-level, massive program for these dirty tricks and election flipping operations, just to build the base, just to build the foundation for what Aaron is saying.
I don't want to be a party pooper. I love all of you and our work, and I'm committed to it as ever. But this is like decades in the making. And to think that we're going to shut this down in like 48 to 72 hours is hard for me to believe, because
I don't think anybody
Kissinger,
thinks that, Aaron.
that good, because dude, like this is just going to be a long slog. I mean, George, 4 years, like, I don't know, 4 years might just be the start, man. Like, these guys have been at this stuff a while, and the Clintons, what's Addie got for us?
Look at what Master McCullough just produced.
Nice.
He's got it all. We got the library, folks. It's Alinsky himself. Radicals, rules for radicals, as Connie mentioned, a pragmatic primer for realistic radicals. First published 1971.
And Addie,
I mean, like, I got a lot of catching up to do. We all got a lot of catching up to do.
Open
These
the
guys
front.
have been at this for a while. But before, so just so we know who we're working with, so Otpor. So I started with Gene Sharp, but I probably should have started with. So Gene Sharp died 2 years ago, and the more recent. I don't know if we have a screen sharing here or anything. But the head or leader or the most well-known Otporian that we have you found this guy yet, George? This guy that starts with an S. You've been researching him yet, maybe?
Well, Popovic is the guy that
Popovic, right?
Yeah, is the one that comes to mind, and he's
Correct.
The kind of fair-haired blonde boy of election flipping.
I've watched 5 hours of YouTube of this Popovic today.
What's wrong with fair hair blonde boys?
Well, if they can throw a football like you, Andy, you don't need to do anything else. But this
I want to say something. He has the same last name as that Greg Popovich, the Spurs coach, which is making me like, oh, I wonder where that he has had a real, that Popovich, he's not like Belichick, right? Belichick likes Trump. Popovich has been a real thorn in the side of Trump. And it's like, well, whatever, and there's a lot going on here. But this gentleman
Popovich is big on European ball players too.
So, I mean, the two gentlemen that our audience is going to need to help us with, certainly as they dive into the research, are going to be, to start, it's going to be SRDA Popovich, Popovic, or SRDJA. Sometimes they put a J in there. And he's going to be the real main Otpor guy. But really, like, he's going to link back to Gene Sharp, right? Gene Sharp and the CIA boys got their meat hooks into this group from Belgrade, this kind of like artsy-fartsy, we're going to call them artsy-fartsy, but I'll tell you about them in a minute. This artsy group in the universities in Belgrade in the 90s, and Milosevic tries to institute this University Act, it's called, where they kind of crack down on the universities. And then these students who are, in their young 20s and stuff, the CIA kind of boosts them back, and, then they have the whole overthrow of Milosevic and all this other stuff. But I have a special request, George. You are going to be with Dr. Hamamoto tomorrow night.
Yeah.
And he is our cultural kind of expert of just like pop culture and how it can lead the way, as Breitbart always said, right? Cultures, politics downstream from culture and everything. So we're going to need, if I could get a special request, a dive in on the Eastern European grunge metal scene. The like, nah, 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 nah. It's like nails on the chalkboard to me, right? But this guy Popovich in the 90s is in that scene, okay? And we won't get too far into it other than to say that like that scene, I think, is thriving in places like New York, where I have friends who are in that scene, even in other places, and people who are into this real like devilly, you know, crazy grunge metal rock scene, right? As you read through the Wikipedia of this man, right? You know, and certain things jump out to different people. In the early life of this man, folks, and I don't know, maybe this won't speak to you guys, but for the Christians in your audience, George, this is going to get them fired up. Popovich, Belgrade, right? He played bass guitar in a goth rock band called BAAL. Again, folks, his
Oh
goth
my
rock
goodness.
band named BAAL.
I got this, Aaron. I got this.
You know
So
Bale? Allie?
okay, I got this. So Baal was the false god that was it the Israelites made out of gold, right?
I don't know I don't know. There's a lot of Baal worship in the Bible. None of it's good. I don't want to get Alex Jonesy here and talk about Satan worshipers running our world and putting
Well,
us into topples,
this
etc.
book,
Right? But like
this
this
book,
dude runs these topples and is running our topple. Used to be in a rock band called Baal. So for you Christians out there who think Baal isn't cool, this guy's into Baal. Just putting
well,
it out there. You know, I
as
don't want
Connie said, and Master McCullough as well, this book in the first edition was dedicated to Lucifer.
what?
They took it out of I think second editions and after that. So
Yeah, if Dr. Hamamoto could enlighten us on just like what is with these people and why they're into this stuff, you know, and it's sick to me that now we're dealing with them. Now you're teaching me about them, you know, having buildings connecting to the IP addresses of my, you know, I put my ballot in a Dominion machine, me, myself. I put it in there. The Dominion machine ate it and it went off to Belgrade where these guys are. So it's like, I didn't, you know, I'm sorry. I know you're scratching your head, George. I hope we're not stressing you out with this. You know? It's just like, I didn't name the band Baal. I wasn't the bassist in the band Baal. I'm sorry. I didn't pick that name. You know, we would have to ask Mr. Popovich why that was the name of the band he wanted. But this is what we're dealing with, folks. And so here they are, you know, and yes, they're involved in topples, you know, Libya, Syria, all the ones that like you've told us. And it's incredible. It's just incredible. You know, like you just scratch a little bit and here we are. So in terms of what do we do, right, George? Like, I'm pretty sure you're going to be right that Otpor and the people involved in Otpor who are very boisterous about who they are, what they do topples. They're revolutionaries for hire. They topple dictators. They write pamphlets about how to topple dictators and they publish them. You know, they've done it here. Black Lives Matter is clearly an Otpor operation, you know, down to the fist and everything. So they're doing this here. Are we winning? Are we losing? I think we're losing. Maybe we're winning, but America's losing.
Eddie had a great interview he set up with Brad Johnson, which is an ex-CIA guy, and he had been a station chief, which is a very high-level position in the CIA, in multiple locations around the world, and he won't tell us exactly which stations. But I said Otpor to him, and he immediately said, "Oh, you know, you're on the right track there. You know, they do these topples, they do these color revolutions." And I really was surprised that a CIA guy would just offer that up and just come straight out and say, you're exactly on the right track. They do topples. And then the other piece to this is the ties to Soros and the Open Society Foundation, the OSF Foundation, for doing these color revolutions. This isn't something that's conspiracy theory. That's this right-wing conspiracy theory about George Soros and all this. This is the CIA, totally nonpartisan analysis. And he even said there's a wing of the CIA, he called it the Bush family wing, of the CIA that said, you know, hey, they got involved in this stuff. And if you look at you've talked a lot about what part of the Zionist movement is responsible for some of these color revolutions. And you've talked a lot about Chabad Lubavitch, and you've talked about blood and soil type movements in the Pale, in Ukraine, and you know, Poland and Belarus, and right in there that whole Eastern European section that kind of broke away from the Soviet Union, and Chechnya. We've had unrest. We've had Georgia. We've had all these, revolutionary, fomenting revolution. All these psychological operation groups that are fomenting these revolutions in these areas that have broken away from the old Soviet Union. And it's the same group. It's the same Otpor group. It's the same Soros-funded group that's doing this stuff. So at some point, when CIA guys, career CIA guys, are coming out and saying this publicly on our show yesterday, this is no longer a secret. You know, these are guys that normally would never say stuff like that are openly defying the rest of the CIA, saying this is a color revolution operation. So that's, to me, is a good thing.
I've been thinking about Chabad today, and I've been thinking about Kolomoisky, and they're involved. I've been looking at a map too. I stared at a map of the Balkans and Europe for a while, and Belgrade is fascinating. Belgrade's right there at the foothills of the Balkans. Bunch of rivers, right? The Danube and everything come right into Belgrade there. Historically very important. I almost want to say I'm sorry to Kolomoisky for a minute, because I think I hate these guys more. You know, at least with Kolomoisky and the Chabad guys, they're trying to get close to God. You know, I wish they were a little more Torah and a little less Talmud, and, you know, a little less, you know, the chainsaws and all the other stuff. But like this non-violence, Baal worship schmutz, ugh, you know, and I don't know that Kolomoisky necessarily puts up with this. I think what this is really teaching me or suggesting to me is, like you say, man, Kissinger and Stern. And it is like, because these guys, this Otpor group is in your face. They're not hiding it. Like, this isn't conspiracy theory. There are videos upon videos upon videos of the Otpor people boisterously bragging about the topples they've done. Libya, Syria, all of them. I mean, all the ones with the Blackberries. The Otpor guys are almost out there to be like, oh, we did it with our nonviolent, playbook, right? And it's like, they can't be in charge. You know, they are doing it, and it is them, and it's really happening. But Kissinger's hand moves them, you know, and Kissinger's hand moved Gene Sharp, and Gene Sharp was sent there to get them mobilized and to turn them into his little Saul Alinskyeites over in the Balkans. And so it's like, it's always coming back to Kissinger's hand, the same way as Chabad links back to Kissinger's hand, you know, and it's just like, and I don't know how, and I wish I had, you know, $300 an hour for, the most expensive research institute in the world to pay to, you know, get the information or whatever it costs. Cause it's just like, it's going to be Kissinger. It's just, how do we get there? How do we find him? He hides himself well, but this is him again.
Well, you know, it's funny because 4 years ago, I started the series with Popovic and Otpor and color revolutions and the great work of William Engdahl talking about these color revolutions. And I talked about Popovic, and he was in front of these groups pulling heads off dolls, you know, showing how this is how you need to torture your enemies and so forth. And like whipping these people into a frenzy to go out and do these horrific acts and so forth. And you just see, it's so Phoenix program Vietnam, the cruelty, just trying to encourage this kind of cruelty. And it was in Albania. This is where we had the organ harvesting and all that, the yellow house and all this stuff. And this Tachi guy who got installed in, well, I think it was Croatia, but they're doing a Phoenix program type of thing where they're literally taking these people at random, kind of off the street, that have shown resistance to the government, and then they disappear. Their family never sees them again. It's Hillary Clinton's best. I mean, she loved Tachi.
Nacht und Nebel. That's what the Germans did. It was night and fog. It disappear dissidents.
And I know I was a little over the top with my Bale reference, not that it's untrue. I mean, he really was, in the band called Bale. But the reason I want you to ask Dr. Hamamoto is, like, I think the CIA has a playbook where they use people that they feel are co-optable, and people who are, into satanic rock worship and other things must be more co-optable than, Osprey researchers or others, right? That's what I'm thinking, is like, there must be something about the grunge rock movement that the CIA and people like Kissinger were like, oh, well, we can use this, it's like, the music might suck, but put your earphones in and, go, feed them some of this and get the rock bands on your side.
Yeah, and that's what Dr. Hamamoto is really, really all about, is the subversion of the music industry and how that's used and co-opted to influence the youth in particular. And I was talking, George and I were speaking to Ann earlier today, Ann Vanderseel, about this, and she asked me if I knew of anybody my age, any of my peers who basically know what's going on, and I couldn't really think of anyone. That's not to say there are not people out there who are paying attention, but the 20-year-olds, that's definitely my smallest demographic, which you would think it would be bigger just because I'm, that's who my peers are. But regardless, my biggest demographic, the people who really are woke, to use the young folks term, are the boomers, the boomers, the Xers, like you, Aaron, and above, the silent gen, the greatest gen. These are the people that have a better idea of what's going on. So, going against that music subversion and trying to get to the youth, I think, is really important. And I think, hopefully I can do something good in that sphere.
Well, Aaron, Addie, that was well said. And this Institute for Peace, anytime the CIA names anything, Institute for Peace, it's like, there was a movie called Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And it's a very funny movie, right? About the Monty Python comedy troupe. And it was about, this making fun of the old knights and chivalry. And they had a castle where they actually had a grail-shaped beacon. And this was these women that just were all alone and looking for knights to come save them. And they would alight this grail-shaped beacon, to attract the chivalrous knights to the castle. And anytime the CIA says Institute for Peace, to me, that's like alighting the grail-shaped beacon. It's immediately, I look into that and say, where is the war? Where is the war propaganda? Where are they recruiting? Where's the training base? Where's the C4 bomb making school? I immediately attract to that like flies. And it turns out that our good friend, Mr. Biden Blackberry, a lookalike, or Ambassador William Taylor, with all of his machinations with training mercenaries in Ukraine with the Javelin missiles and all these things, is also incredibly involved in the Institute for Peace, just like Otpor is. And you just can't believe the connections. You don't even have to lift your pencil You know, those old problems, you know, those little puzzle problems where you weren't allowed to lift your pencil. You don't have to lift your pencil in these things. There's only 6 or 7 people involved.
I did a few compound searches for Otpor and Popovich and William B. Taylor Jr., Ambassador William B. Taylor Jr. I haven't found a ding 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 smoking gun yet, other than like I found the Institutes for Peace all around these guys, right? It's almost like you're saying, right? The CIA gives you the blessing, and then the U.S. Institute for Peace takes you and, you know, fits you for your wedding dress and all the other things. You know, it's like, oh, okay, we'll give you to the
money coming at you, IMF money coming at you. Anthony Weiner had an email address in the Congress, Carnegie Institute for Peace. Immediately, that's USAID money coming at you for covert operations.
It's kind of like calling the Department of War the Department of Defense, you know, a little misnomer there. But I want to give a shout out to Harry Bacharach for doing a fantastic interview. I think it was earlier today that was posted. Harry sent that to you, right, George? And then you posted it with it was like a hacker, right? Hacker whistleblower.
Yeah. Eugene Curtis, I can't remember his first name, but he had hacked the voting systems with 24 lines of code, and for George Bush, and in the Bush-Kerry election of 2004. Yesterday, yes, Harry did the. Harry sent me the video, and I edited it down to 3 minutes because I just wanted to just get that video out there. But what he did was he had an algorithm in there to change any election to a 51-49 win for the opposite guy. So you're winning 70-30, Trump's winning 70-30. The 24 lines of code would flip it over to Biden 51, Trump 49. And so this was a big thing. It was there was congressional inquiries. This guy Curtis went in front of the Congress. There was all these people like Jerry Nadler and Schumer and Stephanie Tubbs and all these people that questioned him and said, how could this happen in America, that you would have software that could flip an election? And anyway, 16 years go by. And so Harry calls him and says, hey, you should be the guy that everyone in the world is talking to right now, because we had all these elections where Trump was winning 65 or 60-40. And then at the last second, the systems were shut down. And this is the signature where you shut the election down and you restart the election after you reprogram all the machines. And then instantaneously it's 51-49. And this is
why are, you know, regardless of, you know, the details, why are our votes going to a foreign country? It's just absurd. Why do we have to go to Belgrade, Serbia to get American votes, or Germany, even if that story is false? It's just insane. Like, why would you outsource American votes? It's just
United Nations PACs.
What's that, Andy?
It's probably PACs within the United Nations that they have to do stuff like that.
Well, there's a couple of things going on there. So let me get to that in a second, but let me finish the Harry Bacharach interview, because he did just a great job. And anyway, it turns out, you know, no one's calling him. No reporters are calling this guy, this Curtis guy, this Eugene Curtis guy, even though he's the only guy who has been interviewed in a congressional investigation ever. And so Ari calls him, and the guy says, well, Trump did call me. You know, the Trump team did call me, and I gave them the stuff, but I don't know if they're going to do anything with it. And he says that the 24 lines of code could be altered and are probably still being used by Smartmatic or Dominion or anybody, that these are open lines of code. And the reason why that's significant is that if you talk to this guy named Rams Land, Rams Land, he did a total end-to-end audit of the Dominion system. And he said there's 9 points of easy access and hacking. And there's malware code that can harvest the password of all the administrators without any effort at all. Farmer Jones, who we talked to tonight, Eddie and I, said that there was a video of a young lady who took apart the hardware for the Dominion voting system with a ballpoint pen. And in 2.5 minutes, she was able to open it with a ballpoint pen and get the administrator password. This is comical. So how a Secretary of State could, as an auditor, certify an election with this kind of comical security with no safeguards for the most important election ever in the history of the world is really it's incredible.
I want to say, just to throw in, I haven't heard anybody talk about it. Just to be, I'm sorry if we've thrown too much spaghetti on the wall, right? But you were talking about airdrops and like a secured space between the voting machines and the internet, right? And let's just not forget Stuxnet. I know this isn't centrifuges, but Stuxnet did not need to be on the internet. And we got all the same players circling around these waters here too. Stuxnet and Operation Olympic Games, right? Where there was that worm that was able to do the job inside the hardware and the software and everything, once you got it in there. So that's why it's like they do have all these ports, right? The machine has all these ports. So it's like, even if it's offline, if you can get a USB, a pen drive into that thing with, whatever's needed, it never needs to be online. And I don't want to say Stuxnet other than like something that is Stuxnet-esque. And like, what could it be? I don't know. We'll have to do a whole nother special on Stuxnet, but.
Well, what you're saying, Aaron, is in one of the primary precepts of network security, if you don't want hacking and you don't want intrusion, is the easiest safeguard is what's called an air gap.
Right.
Which means that you don't have an internet connection to your network, because a network connection, any kind of network connection, is a potential point of vulnerability. Okay. So if you look at NSA type networks and so forth, there's an air gap. If you look at the Iranian nuclear facilities, there was an air gap. So the way that Stuxnet, which was a malicious piece of software which caused the centrifuges to spin too fast and demolished about 1,000 of 8,000 centrifuges in Iran, was they had to get a contractor who was working there under the auspices of doing some kind of work inside of the Iranian facility to introduce a thumb drive to then put the malware into the system. Okay. So the same principle works here for the individual networks of voting machines. Okay. If you connect the voting machines to the internet, you introduce a gap. You cross the bridge of the air gap, and you allow for the Belgrade type programmers and the Guccifer type programmers to then penetrate and create a it's actually called an electronic command center, which you can then, once you're in there, you can launch all kinds of attacks. Okay. Well, it turns out that a lot of these different systems in these different states did actually get connected to the internet, which allowed for the introduction of malware. The other but you don't need that. If you just have someone who's a Confederate, like a Warren Flood with a Ferrari coming in at 3:45 a.m. with a thumb drive, that works just as well as too. So these, and you saw me there in the parking lot with cash flow. You saw the license plate, cash flow. We believe it's Warren Flood until someone tells it's not Warren Flood. But you saw the red Ferrari.
And Wes and I were listening to Jim Quinn earlier today. Wes listens to him. He was saying that you said a woman did it the hardware hack in 2 minutes. Mr. Quinn was saying that someone did it remotely in 7 minutes, hacking into this Dominion. So, I think the Swiss cheese metaphor that George used is really apt. They did, obviously, I think, did this on purpose. When you look at all the encryption and security that computers and programs and software are capable of, you would think you would have state-of-the-art security for the most important election in the world. But when you get, these amateur hackers who can do it remotely in less than 10 minutes, it's a red flag.
They probably gave someone the password anyway. Who we kidding?
Oh yeah. No, no. It's definitely the purposeful
Password exclamation point.
So, George, you mentioned yesterday in your video the hardware was made in China. I'd bet a nickel that it's Israeli, possibly bad Mossad money behind the Chinese companies making the chips and the hardware that go into the devices, because a lot of the Israeli telecom hardware and everything is being made in China. So when the guy said it was made in quote unquote China, it's like, well, who owns it, right? But that's just, you've taught us that too. A few questions I had here before it's too late. This Canvas group, right? So Popovich is Canvas. Is Canvas white canvas? Is that just a coincidence? Do we think that maybe, probably?
Well, there was this is where it gets, there's some people on the internet that, have a strong affinity for Flynn Intel Group. And anything you say about Flynn Intel Group, you're going to get a lot of resistance. But
I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
There was a guy named Iodonisi, and Iodonisi was the CEO or founder of this White Canvas group.
Mm-hmm.
And they did psychological operations for Libya and Tunisia and Egypt and in the Arab Spring overthrows. And psychological operations are really important because if you can get everybody to lay down their arms and take over the country with one guy with a pistol, there's a lot less death and suffering and so forth. So I'm not saying I don't like psychological operations, and maybe that was good for Tunisia. Maybe that was good for Libya. Maybe that was good for Egypt.
But I guess we haven't put out, like, when I say Canvas is the Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies, right? Canvas, again, Center for Applied Nonviolent Actions and Strategies, created by Popovich and the Otpor crew, right? It was sort of like, hey, Otpor, you did great. You toppled Milosevic. You took over your country. Now what are you going to do with your time? Well, let's start an organization for you. We'll call it the Center for Applied Nonviolent Actions and Strategies, Canvas. And then for the last 20 years, they've been going around with Canvas. Even you can go on YouTube and type in Canvas. You can type in Popovich Canvas, and you can see him going around with his Canvas group to do all the things you just said Iodonisi is doing, which we knew Iodonisi was doing. So it's like when I saw that he's got this thing called Canvas, which does all the things that White Canvas did with Iodonisi. I mean, I'm not trying to disparage any, people here with any Intel groups, but seemed like, two canvases, same.
Well, let me give you two stories. One was a fruit vendor who
right.
was slapped by a female police officer, and he was a young man. And if you're a young man in a Muslim country and you are slapped by a woman, it is the height of disgrace. And so supposedly this person set themselves on fire, right? Well, those are the kind of stories that are kind of like the Floyd stories, the George Floyd stories here in America, where they're incendiary stories. They're kind of like the Rodney King type things, where everyone just like you push it out there in the media, and then all of a sudden, 1,100 or 1,011 stores in Santa Monica are being shattered. The windows are being shattered, and all the goods are being stolen because people are saying George Floyd, right? They're not doing it because they know George Floyd. They're doing it because they saw a news story about George Floyd that they believe is true, and that has caused this injustice and caused them to do violent action. This is the stuff that White Canvas Productions does. This is the stuff that Canvas does. And the basic idea is you can get a whole lot of extra punch without having to spend one dime on an army. You don't have to do any training. You just basically take advantage of the mob. And that is the name of the game. And there was similar stories. There was if you remember in Egypt, that's to start the revolution there, quote unquote. And it's amazing how the radio station is immediately ready to broadcast that the revolution has begun when things happen. But thank you.
Well, nowadays, I mean, it's not a secret. This isn't conspiracy theory. Popovich brags about doing those.
Oh yeah.
Like that's like everybody. Like it's over now. It was a school play. You know, now that the dust is settled, Popovich and the Canvas group and Otpor players come in and say, "Hey, we got you. It was a school play, that Arab Spring. It was a good one, wasn't it?" You know, and it's like they're admitting it now. This isn't a secret. There's no conspiracies here. Popovich would probably do an interview with us if we asked him, because he apparently loves talking about how good he is at putting on school plays. So that, and, you know, I mean, I was going to pick out which of the top 10, you know, principles of the movement from his playbook that they've written that you guys had there. You were talking about earlier, yesterday, I think. You know, it's all in there, right? And this Gene Sharp, he had 198 different tactics for nonviolence that you could use. And yeah, Canvas, you know, Productions would do all those. So, you know, we do think Canvas and White Canvas could be cut from the same cloth. That's what I thought. Another question. Do you know about the Stratfor stuff with Otpor and the Stratfor and the WikiLeaks that they found, where Popovich was communicating with, you know, this Stratfor? You're familiar, I guess. Could you give us a roundup on that? I'm not it's so clear.
Well,
What do you know?
For people who don't know, WikiLeaks published a group of leaks called the Stratfor leaks. Stratfor stands for strategic forecasting. Gosh, I'm trying to think of. I'm
working you hard tonight. I'm sorry.
Well, I got up at 4 this morning, so I'm sorry I'm a little slow right now. But anyway, basically, strategic forecasting is a way of telling your operatives in the field that this is the next target. And you can do that through the methodology of forecasts. Okay. Like, I'm going to forecast that Libya will fall in the next 6 months because there's a lot of movement in this group or that group. And those are signals to your different operative groups that now's the time to move, right? And Barrett Brown was involved in this, you know, and getting these leaks and so forth. So if you look at all the WikiLeaks was used, whether or not Julian Assange was a part of it, WikiLeaks was used strategically during the Arab Spring to release embarrassing information about the different ruling families of different countries at precisely the right time. You know, the ruling family of Egypt, for instance, had these tigers and, you know, lions and bears and trained monkeys and parrots and exotic animals. And here's the size of their pool. And here, all these facts that were reprehensible and disgusting to the people who were the common people, the sandal dwellers of the street, causing a uprising, causing a popular uprising. Okay, so WikiLeaks was weaponized, whether Julian knew it or not. If you look at the strategic nature of the releases right before the revolutions, and it just so happens the radio station was ready with Voice of America, just so happens all the insurgency groups were ready, just so happens all the bridges were wired with explosives, just so happens all the C4 training and all the bomb making schools was done, all these things, in preparation for this overnight spontaneous revolution.
You mentioned Julian Assange, George. As we wrap up here, we just hit an hour, folks. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. His ruling, Judge Bareitzer, will be making that call in January, and the runoff for Georgia Senate also in January. So a couple big dates coming up for us at the beginning of 2021 as we head deeper into the fourth quarter of this craziest year of 2020. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. People all over the world tuning in to what's going on in our country, guys, and we're playing a big part of it. We talked earlier at dinner tonight, George, about the 3% who rebelled, the American Revolution. And we're a part of it, and we're that 3% now in 2020. So I just want to express that. Final thoughts tonight, guys. Hopefully under 60 seconds there, Aaron.
I'll go first. Yeah. I've said that I want to start an Osprey Bible study. I hope that's not too over the top. We'll do those early in the morning, maybe on a separate channel or something. I don't want to get too gaudy into everything here. But it is like, man, we all really need to pray and ask for repentance and forgiveness. Our country, our tax dollars have been guilty of topples. George has taught us about them. John has taught us about them. Our CIA, we can sit here and hawk the CIA, and we do, and we will, and that's fine. But they, with our money or whatever, have been responsible for topples. And topples and topples and topples, and we're getting toppled now, and it's like you reap what you sow, and the chickens come home to roost, and it's really unfortunate. It's like, man, how many countries has our military-industrial complex done this to? And now it's happening to us, and I don't know if anything but prayer, and that's why I kind of threw that bail stuff in there at the beginning. It was just like, you know what, man, I don't want to be that guy, but it's like, I'm sorry for all that our military-industrial complex did, for all the topples that have come before, but I don't want to get toppled, and I can feel us getting toppled, just like clearly so many others have, and I hope we can stop it.
2020, the year the chickens came home to roost. Andy, let's hear from Andy before we sign off, and then finally George.
Hey, haven't got much to say. Sit next to this guy the whole time if you guys always listen to the show. But yeah, you guys talk about the election manipulation going on. It started with the Russian hacking 4 years ago with Trump, the coronavirus. What else have we got going on? The Ukraine scandal. All this stuff, along with Google, Facebook, the social media, banning YouTubers and shows like us. And all that counts into election manipulation. It's like each one has their certain percentages that got Biden the vote, including voter fraud in general. And we got to somehow get this under control. I know we're going to be just vocal about it and do our best to let everyone know what's going on. George and Addie, you guys do a great job with your research and your distribution of the knowledge. Just keep going and keep figuring things out. And we appreciate you guys letting us know what's going on.
Well, I guess the cleanup. I'll just say this: we have 5 lawsuits going on with the Trump lawsuits. We have a couple of independent lawsuits. One is in Michigan, Grand Rapids Justice Center. We're following all those. We're filing amicus briefs in all of those. We're doing litigation support for all of those. We're working with people like McDuff, the great Georgetown litigator, and also FJ. We're all over the board helping with key facts, key things that you would present as evidence to make your case about, for instance, the connection between Otpor and Dominion in Belgrade, and all these connections that people wouldn't normally see as obvious. So all I can say is, Addie said this best today, which is with Ann Vandersteel. If you have a negative outlook and you think you're going to lose, you're going to be right. If you think you're going to win, you got a chance. Right? And so we can't afford not to have a winning attitude and a winning outlook. That's the way I'm approaching it. I don't even think for 1 minute that we can lose. We cannot afford to lose. We have to win.
Thanks,
Well
Coach.
said, George. Well said, George.
Yep.
Let's end it on that, folks. Got a 2 Benjamins worth of folks tuning in from around the world. We want to thank everybody for that. We'll check in again soon this week with our homies in Michigan, Aaron and Andy. George and I will be continuing our work here in Myrtle Beach. Stay frosty, folks. Cheers, and
I
until
expect
next
you
time.
guys to be a little more tan next time around.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.